Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. Let's land on her, Jim. But Jim was dead against it at first. He says, I don't want to go fooling longer no rack. We's doing blame well, and we better let blame well alone, as the good book says. Like as not days a watchman on that rack. Watch your grandmother, I says. There ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house, and do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house such a night as this? When it's likely to break up and wash off down the river any minute. Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. And besides, I says, we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Cigars, I bet you, and cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich and get $60 a month, and they don't care a cent what a thing costs, as long as they want it. Stick a candle in your pocket, I can't rest. Jim, till we give her a rummaging. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go by this thing? Not for pie, he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure, that's what he'd call it. And he'd land on that wreck if it was his last act. And wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself nor nothing? Why, you'd think it was Christopher Columbus discovering Kingdom Come. I wish Tom Sawyer was here. Jim, he grumbled a little, but give in. He said we mustn't talk any more than we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the starboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out there. We went sneaking down the slope of it to larboard in the dark towards the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon we struck the forward end of the skylight and clumb onto it. And the next step fetched us in front of the captain's door, which was open, and by Jiminy, away down through the Texas hall we see a light, and all in the same second we seemed to hear low voices in yonder. And Jim whispered, and said he was feeling powerful sick, and told me to come along. I says, all right, and was going to start for the raft, but just then I heard a voice wail out and say, Oh, please don't, boys, I swear I won't ever tell. Another voice, pretty loud. It's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want to move in your share of the truck, and you've always got it too, because you swore if you didn't you'd tell. But this time you've said in jest one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherous hound in this country. By this time Jim was gone for the raft. I was just a-biling with curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, and so I won't either. I'm a-going to see what's going on here, so I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage and crept aft in the dark there till there warn't but one stateroom betwixt me and the cross hall of the Texas. Then in there I see a man stretched on the floor and tied hand and foot, and 2 men standing over him, and one of them had a dim lantern in his hand, and the other one had a pistol. This one kept pointing the pistol at the man's head on the floor and saying, I'd like to, and I oughter, too, a mean skunk. The man on the floor would shrivel up and say, Oh, please don't, Bill. I ain't ever going to tell. And every time he said that, the man with the lantern would laugh and say, Deed you ain't. You never said no truer thing than that. You bet you. And once he said, Hear him beg. And yet if we hadn't got the best of him and tied him, he'd have killed us both. And what for? Just for nothing. Just because we stood on our rights, and that's what for. But I lay you ain't going to threaten nobody any more, Jim Turner. Put up that pistol, Bill. Bill says, I don't want to, Jake Packard. I'm for killing him. And didn't he kill old Hatfield just the same way? And don't he deserve it? But I don't want him killed. I've got my reasons for it. Bless your heart for them words, Jake Packard. I'll never forget you as long as I live, says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that. but hung up his lantern on a nail and started towards where I was there in the dark and motioned Bill to come. I crawfished as fast as I could about 2 yards, but the boat slanted so that I couldn't make very good time. So to keep from getting run over and catched, I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The man came a-pawning along in the dark, and when Packard got to my stateroom, he says, "Here, come in here." And in he come, and Bill after him. But before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered, and sorry I come. Then they stood there with their hands on the ledge of the berth and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell they was by the whiskey they had been having. I was glad they didn't drink whiskey, but it wouldn't made much difference anyway, because most of the time they couldn't have treated me because I didn't breathe. I was too scared. And besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear such talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner. He said he'll tell, and he will. If we was to give both our shares to him now, it wouldn't make no difference after the row, and the way we've served him. Sure as you're born. He'll turn state's evidence. Now, you hear me? I'm for putting him out of his troubles. So am I, says Packard, very quiet. Blame it. I'd sort of begun to think you wasn't. Well then, that's all right. Let's go and do it. Hold on a minute. I ain't had my say yet. You listen to me. Shooting's good, but there's quieter ways of things got to be done. But what I say is this. If it ain't good sense to go courting around after a halter, if you can get what you're up to in some way, that's just as good. And at the same time, don't bring you into no risks. Ain't that so? You bet it is. But how are you going to manage it this time? Well, my idea is this. We'll rustle round and gather whatever pickings were overlooked in the staterooms and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now I say it ain't going to be more'n 2 hours before this wrack breaks up and washes off down the river, see? He'll be drowned and won't have nobody to blame for it but his own self. I reckon that's a considerable sight better than a killing off him. I'm unfavorable to a killing man as long as you can get around it. But it ain't good sense. It ain't good morals. Am I right? Yes, I reckon you are. But I suppose she don't break up and wash off. Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we? All right, then come along. So they started, and I lit out, all in a cold sweat, and scrambled forward. It was dark as pitch there, but I said in a kind of coarse whisper, "Jim?" And he answered up, right at my elbow with a sort of moan, and I says, "Quick, Jim! It ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers in yonder, and if we don't hunt up their boat and set up her drifting down the river so these fellows can't get away from the wreck, there's one of 'em's going to be in a bad fix. But if we find their boat, we can put all of 'em in a bad fix. For the sheriff, I'll get 'em. Quick, hurry! I'll hunt the larboard side, you hunt the starboard." "You started the rafting." "Oh, my lordy, raft? They ain't no raft no more. She done broke loose and gone. I ain't here we is." Chapter 13. Well, I catch my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that. But it warn't no time to be sentimentering. We'd got to find that boat now. Had to have it for ourselves. So we went a-quaking and shaking down the starboard side, and slow work it was, too. Seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further. So scared he hadn't hardly any strength left, he said. But I said, come on. If we get left on this wreck, we are in a fix, sure. So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas, and found it, and then scrabbled along forward on the skylight, hanging from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross hall, there was the skiff. Sure enough, I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second, I would have been aboard of her, but just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out only a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone. but he jerked it in again and says, "Heave that blame lantern out of sight, Bill." We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light to be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.